With the Daas Tevunos on page Samachay 65. For those who are using the paragraphs, we're still in paragraph Ayin Ches 78. We finished yesterday reading the piece of Adir Bamorim, that there are the Adir Bamorim written by the Ramchal, a Kabbalah Sefer, where the Ramchal explains the pasuk at the end of Vayishlach, that the Torah names, HaKadosh Baruch Hu names 8 kings who were kings in Edom before there was a Jewish king. And of course, the obvious question is, who really cares, right? Who really cares about the names of 8 kings who were kings before Shaul became the king over Klal Yisrael? Again, we talk about the Torah is nitzchias, it's eternal. Every single letter has to have meaning. Not only the Torah, but we've mentioned this so many times. The Gemara Megillah Daf Yud Dalet says that the Gemara says there were 48 male Nevi'im and 7 female Nevi'im. And the Gemara doesn't list their names. The Gemara lists the 7 women, doesn't list the 48 men. Rashi lists the 48 men, the question of Girsa and Rashi, but that's the way it is, 48 and 7. The Gemara then asks from a pasuk that we know there were thousands and thousands of prophets. And the Gemara says, yes, there were thousands and thousands of prophets, but the 48 men and 7 women are the ones that were designated by God to write down that which they prophesied about, because it was a nevuah shehutzracha l'dayros. Their prophecy is something that is needed for all generations. There's something there for every generation, and those got written down. Yeshaya, Yirmiyah, Yecheskel, all the Treyosah, etc., etc. Irrespective, as we learned in Yeshaya last Tuesday, we discussed this, irrespective of the fact that Yeshaya may be prophesizing about the downfall of Philistine, or he may be prophesizing about the downfall of the Assyrian kingdom, those nevuahs were written down and have to be understood in every generation. They are prophecies, and we don't look at them as, oh, that prophecy happened already. It has no meaning for today, because if that was the case, it wouldn't be written down at all, according to the Gemara. So these things have to be understood in the context of what they mean today. Kal v'chomer, and certainly, if something's written in the Torah, it has to have meaning for all generations. We mentioned also the Gemara in Chulin and Daf Samach Hamid Beis. The Gemara says that Reish Lakish said that there are psukim in the Torah that if you didn't know better, you would burn them because they have no relevance to us. And then Reish Lakish goes on to explain and says that those psukim that you think are meaningless and that you'd be willing to burn, hen gufei Torah, they form the skeleton, the backbone of the whole Torah. And he gives examples of such psukim, and he shows how these are the backbone of the Torah. So when the Torah at the end of Vayishlach, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I want you to know the names of 8 kings that ruled over Edom Esav, and these 8 kings were kings before the first Jewish king, Shaul. And of course, so who cares? Who cares whether there were 8 kings, 10 kings, or 12 kings before Shaul? And certainly who cares what the name of all these Edomite kings were? So to this, we introduce the Kabbalah that talks about these 8 kings in a special way, and what these 8 kings mean. Enters the Ramchal in the Adir Bamorim, and as a subject in the Adir Bamorim, he talks about what each of these 8 kings represents in the life of every person. And in order for the person to become sovereign, in order for him to be a Jewish king, there are 8 Edomite kings that exist in his life, or potentially exist in the life of every Jew, and potentially exist in the life of the whole world. And each of these kings need to be defeated before the Jewish king can be crowned. That's a basic message. So the third king that we learned about yesterday and Thursday was Husham, the king of the senses, Hush. And Husham represents the challenge of a person who focuses on his guf. He only sees what his eyeballs, his physical eyeballs see. He only hears and understands that which his physical ears hear, and his physical brain understands. He's a physicality person. The result of that is, switching back to the Daas Tevunos, as we mentioned last week, if a person introduces himself to God and says, my name is Reuven Guf, then since Guf was created behester panim, God will treat Mr. Reuven Guf with a hester panim, not with light. The Guf is created from a hester panim, often in adama, dark and dense. And if you want to be Mr. Guf, dark and dense, ruling over your neshama, God will welcome you and say hello to dark and dense, hester panim. A person introduces himself to God and says, my name is Reuven or Chana or whatever, and I'm Mr. or Mrs. Neshama, and I'm working hard on my Neshama to rule over my Guf. The Rebbeinu Shalom says, oh, you're a Neshama person. Neshama was made from Or, Ha'oras Panim. I am going to treat you in the same way, and I'm going to send you Ha'oras Panim, more light. So you sleep in the bed you make. Guf will bring Hastoras Panim. Neshama will bring Ha'oras Panim. And that's basically what we're up to. And that's what the Ramchal was talking about in the Adib Mamoroin. The Chush, the third king that needs to be conquered, is this king that wants you to live only what you see, only what you hear, etc. And not understand that there's an inside, there's a paninius, there's a chitzonius, there's a superficial, and people live superficial. And then you can go beyond the superficial and get in what's going on really inside this situation, what's going on inside what's happening in the world. And what is God saying while this is happening? What is God saying? What's his message? What's he talking about? That's when you pierce the superficiality and you defeat the king Chusham in your life, and you take the next step towards becoming the king, crowning your neshama over your guf. Okay, so on page Samachay 65, paragraph 87. Rav Friedlander's caption is, Mechet Adam Harishon, from the time of the Chet of Adam Harishon, after he ate from the Eitz Daas Tovara and brought that infection into his body, which, as we learned, the Ramchal told us, can never leave his body, no matter how great the neshama is, no matter how much work it does, with rare exception, nobody can do it. The body needs to go into the ground, decompose, release the infection, and then at Tchias HaMesim, a new body without that infection arises, and the neshama rejuvenated from the Olam HaNeshamas goes in. Boom! We've now started the perfection of the imperfect world, or in the process of completing the perfection of the imperfect world. But from the Chet of Adam Rishon, what happened at the Chet of Adam Rishon? In order to really understand the Ramchal, he's talked about Adam Rishon several times in the Sefer. He's going to talk about him now. You really need to learn, even if you're going to read it quickly, the Parsha and Bereshis about Adam Rishon and the Chet of the Eitz Daas. When you read it again, you're going to understand the Psukim in a completely different light. At any rate, the Pasuk says that, let's quote the Pasuk, after the Nachash has his little conversation with Chava, the Pasuk says in Bereshis, Perek Gimel Pasuk Vav, it says, Vateira ha'isha, the woman saw. She's using her physical eyeballs. Ki tov ha'etz l'machol, this is a good tree to eat. V'chisavahu lo'inayim, it's desirous to the eyes. Again, it's an emphasis. The Pasuk began with, and Chava saw that it was a good tree. And it was desirous to her eyes. What is the Pasuk emphasizing here? The use of the physical eyeball in a way that overrules God. It may be that the tree looks good. It may be very desirous to your physical eyeballs. It looks great. But God told you that it's poison. So now, what do you want to believe? You want to believe what your eyes tell you? Oh, that's a nice tree. Now, a person can make a beautiful salad, most beautiful salad you ever saw. If you like salad, most beautiful salad. A person, if you like cake, can make the most beautiful cake in the world. You like steak, could be the most delicious looking steak in the world. And that's what the person who made the steak, the salad, what he did was he put a drop of cyanide in it. It's going to kill you. It looks great. The physical eye, this is great. What a steak. I'm going to take this down with some ketchup and fries. Or this salad. This looks beautiful. A little shum shamir, a sauce on top. It's going to be delicious, maybe with a lahmaniyah. It's going to kill you if you drop a cyanide. You can't see the cyanide. It's going to kill you. So, Chava, the pasuk says, she sees that this is a good thing to eat. Geschmacka. This is a geschmacka fruit. And it's desirous to my eyes. Okay. Now, how do you want to live, Chava? You want to live based upon what your physical eyes see, or do you want to live which means guf, or do you want to live neshama? God told you there's cyanide in this thing. It's going to kill you. Don't eat it. Which one do you want to believe? God's message to you, which is inside this fruit, there's cyanide. I'm telling you, inside there's cyanide. Or do you want to just trust your eyes and say, looks good, I'm going to eat it? That was the test of Chava and Adam Rishon. And she took and she ate. The next pasuk, Zayin, Vatipakachna eineshneim. Their eyes opened up. They wised up in their eyes. Vayedu ke'eru memhem, and now they knew they were naked. There's a tremendous amount of emphasis in these two psukim about the eyes. She saw her eyes, etc. The eyes opened up. What's happening here? The chet of the Eitz Hadas Tovara was this challenge to Adam Harishon. Had he overcome that challenge, we would have had a completely different world. We would have had the Gilui Hayichud at that moment, and we would have been in a completely different world. He failed that test. What's the test? The test that we've been talking about for 2 weeks. Do you want to be Mr. or Mrs. Guf or Mr. or Mrs. Neshama? That's the ultimate test of life. And Adam Harishon, he's given that test on the first day of his life. Adam Harishon, this is the ultimate test. You're a day old. You're not even a day old. It's a couple of hours old. And the Baruch says, here is the ultimate test of life. Are you going to live physical eyeball, or are you going to understand that there's more to the physical eyeball, which is me? I'm telling you something that your eyes can't see. This thing has cyanide in it. And Adam Rishon failed that ultimate test. He went and ate it because it looked good. And because he did that, what did Adam Rishon turn into at that moment? He turned into Mr. Guf. He let the physical eyeballs defeat God's message of the internal meaning of this tree. And so Adam and Chava said, we'd like to introduce ourselves to you, God. We are Mr. and Mrs. Guf. Mr. and Mrs. Guf. If you're Mr. and Mrs. Guf, now we're going to send you Guf. You're going to have Hester Pun. So Rav Friedlander writes on the top of page 65, Samachay, the caption, Mechet Adam Harishon, because of the sin of Adam Harishon, Gover HaHester, the Hester Punim was victorious, it was empowered. V'holcha v'nismata ha'chachma, and the chachma, man's true knowledge, not the physical eyeball understanding, but the true meaning that God gave him, was lost. It was weakened. Hashem hechse ha'ra'aseh b'matan Torah. Hashem gave back to the Jewish people this light to understand the truth through God's message rather than your physical guf. He returned this ability to the Jewish people at Har Sinai at Matan Torah. Ach kilkalu ba'egel. When they did the sin of the egel, they went back to Adam Harishon after the sin, and they brought guf back into their life. So we have a process of Adam Harishon before the Chet, Adam Harishon after the Chet, the Jewish people at Har Sinai, and then back to the Egel, which brought them down to Adam Harishon after the Chet. Now that's the summary. Now the Ramchal writes as follows: V'tiri shezehu ma shekara la'adam etchila. And you should see now and understand this is exactly what happened to Adam at the beginning. In other words, Ramchal saying what I just explained to you, what Lublin explained to you for the last 2 weeks about Guf and Neshama, Mr. and Mrs. Guf, or Mr. and Mrs. Neshama, and how that affects your life, is exactly the test that was presented to Adam Harishon on the first hours of his living. The same thing is true for his children, his descendants after him. Because they decided to follow their physical eyes. They empowered the guf over their neshama. I like this. It looks good. It tastes good. It hears what I hear sounds okay. And they didn't go into the depths and plumb the depths. What's beneath what I'm seeing? What's beneath what I'm hearing? Do I really understand what God's doing here, or is my understanding based upon what my eyeballs see in the physical world? Therefore, because Adam and Chava decided to introduce themselves as Mr. and Mrs. Guf, it looks good, the tree. It looks desirous. The Baruch Shalom said, fine, you want to be Mr. and Mrs. Guf? Guf is dense and dark, Afam and Adama, and that's the way I'm going to run your lives, through the Hester Panim of dense and darkness. And therefore God says to Adam after the Chet, you now want to be Mr. and Mrs. Guf? You're Mr. and Mrs. Guf. Now take your Guf and go into the field, and with the sweat of your brow, try to make a panasa. Friedlander quotes at the footnote 153, he quotes the Gemara that before the Chet, Adam Harishon didn't have to toil or labor for his food. There are different Gemaras and Medrashim that talk about this. Instead of wheat coming out of the ground, and Adam Harishon having to do X, Y, and Z until he can get a piece of bread or a cake, bread was coming out of the ground. And that's all you had to do was he had to pick the bread and eat, put some butter on it, whatever, and he has bread. He got breakfast. He didn't have to cut wheat and grind the wheat and make flour, mix it with water and bake it, make a fire and then bake. No, it was all ready for him. Why should he have to toil his body to make a piece of bread? He's not living guf. He's living the Shama. And therefore, we're going to give him free time. If he introduced himself, had he introduced himself as Mr. Neshama, Rabbi Shalom would have said, I'm going to treat you like a Neshama. I'm going to keep your time free so that you can develop your Neshama. And I'm not going to busy you with Guf because you want Neshama. But he decided that he wanted Guf. So Rabbi Shalom said, you want Guf? Guf, go into the field with your Guf, and now spend your time on planting, sowing, reaping. You're going to spend your guf now. The guf that you want is going to spend time creating parnasa for the guf. And this is B'zeis HaPechel Teichel Lechem. This is the sheet of Ramchal, as we mentioned several times. These things, when the Rebbeinu Shalom says to Adam Rishon before the sin, if you eat from this tree, you shall die. It's not God's warning, I will punish you, I will kill you. It's the Rebbeinu Shalom saying to Adam Rishon, do not eat from this tree, it's got cyanide in it. And if you eat from the tree, it's going to kill you. I'm not going to punish you. I'm telling you, it's got a skull and crossbones on it. Don't eat from this tree. You can't digest it. It will kill you. Then Adam Rishon eats from it, and he comes to and he says, well, God, why did you punish me? Why did you? I didn't punish you. A person knowingly drinks cyanide, and then he's dying. He looks up to God and says, why'd you do this to me? I didn't want to do this to you. Everyone knows cyanide can kill you, and you decided to drink it. What do you want from the Rebbeinu Shalom? The Rebbeinu Shalom is telling Adam Rishon, I'm telling you, beyond what you can see, I want you to know the inner meanings and the inner understanding of certain things. There are things that you should do and things you shouldn't do, because I know what's going on inside. So Rebbeinu Shalom said to Adam Rishon, listen, it's not a punishment. You're going to sleep in the bed you made. If you're going to be Mr. Guf, then gesundheit, be Mr. Guf. Now take your Guf and go into the field and work the whole day and sweat so that you can earn parnasa for your Guf. If you had introduced yourself as Mr. Neshama, I would have made sure that you have free time to work on your Neshama and become a greater person. I wouldn't bother you with all the parnasa business. Bread would be sprouting out of the ground so you can spend your day in the Neshama world. But you decided to spend your day in Guf world. Wow, this tree looks beautiful. Yeah, fine. The tree looks beautiful. Go out into the field and deal with the beautiful trees and plant them and sow them and etc., and bake. You want to be Guf? Get Guf. This is not a punishment. It's sleeping in the bed you made. You made decisions. You're going to live with them. And from that day on, after the Chet of Adam Rishon, Kol Omal Adam Lepiyu, V'gam HaNefesh Lo Yisimali. From that day on, we all live this system of go out, you're going to sweat to make a panasa. You're going to have to work at your panasa. It's not popping out of the ground. And the true knowledge and understanding that is part of the neshama, every generation that's come after Adam Harishon until we get to Matan Torah, went down and down and down. It became more and more guf. The Dor HaMabul introduced itself as we are Mr. and Mrs. Guf, the whole generation except for Noah. We are Mr. and Mrs. Guf. Immorality, etc., in the Dor HaMabul, we are Guf. So Rosh Hashanah says, you're Guf, we'll treat you with Guf. Then came Noah. And then from Noah to Avram Avinu, we had Storm and other situations. People introduced themselves to God as Mr. and Mrs. Guf. And Rosh Hashanah said, "Go fine. So I'll treat you with Guf. I'll treat you with Esther from King Avram Avinu for those who learned Derech Hashem, and a revolution happened in the world. God and Avram Avinu made a bris, and Avram Avinu's descendants became Klal Yisrael, the chosen people, and they got the ability to go to the level of Adam Rishon before the Chet, which happened at Matan Torah, and unfortunately they lost that status at the Egel. So we need, and the Ramchal is going to talk about this later in the Sefer, we create more work for our neshama with every Aveira we do. In other words, we already have in us, after Adam Rishon fell to the Chet of the Eitz Hadas Tovara, we already have that in us. And that's not going to get out until 120 years and decomposition. Got to get rid of that bacteria. That's in everyone. As soon as the person is born, he's got the Eitz Hadas Tovara situation that needs to be corrected. Every time he does an Aveira in his life, he adds on to that Eitz Hadas Tovara, and the neshama, which at birth had one issue to deal with, can I clean up Eitz Hadas Tovara, which it can't in this lifetime, but how much of Eitz Hadas Tovara can I clean up in this person in his lifetime? That's a job. And then every time the person does an Aveira, the neshama gets another red alert. Oh, we have another thing to clean up. Oh, we have another thing to clean up. Oh, we got another thing to clean up. So every Aveira gives the neshama more work to do in order to clean up that guf.